Check and make sure our project directory is set to the Extremes folder. Click OK. Go to File. Load a scene from the Scenes folder called Extremes4. I have a really nifty looking hairy inchworm here that we're going to inch around. Now this is no different from the first inchworm box exercise that we did back on Extremes1. What we're going to do is we're going to make one object, which is the tail, follow the other object, which is the head. So let's switch to a top view and we'll get started. Let's check our settings, make sure our channel edit is set to all channels. I'm going to bring up the graph editor here. We're going to scale to Y, scale to fit. I'm going to move this down to frame 40. Only going to do 40 frames this time. Go into the Edit tab. Down under Keyframe Editing, let's just double check, make sure our spline edit is set to all channels. Click into the Animate tab and we'll start. First things first, if we move this forward we can see that our worm mesh is going to interfere with how we keyframe. So let's hide the mesh, toggle it to N so we can't see it, and just focus on the bones. Zoom out with wheel mouse and we'll start. Since everything on frame 0 is a keyframe, we'll treat the first position as an extreme. Looks fine, so we'll advance to frame 10. While our head is selected, let's move this forward on Z. Move it forward 10 more frames to frame 20. We'll move it to a different position. Scrub to frame 30. We'll move it to a different position and keep it aimed in the direction that it's traveling. Go to frame 40 and we'll just right click on Z and move it in local axis forward. When we zoom out we can see that we've created a path here. Now we go through a second time and double check our extremes. We can see that the path is bowing away, so we'll position that and we'll run the heading so he aims along the path. If we just click on the little tick marks on the path we can see where it goes. We have it bowed over here, so we'll adjust heading, so heading faces along the path. Adjust heading once more, and again, so when we press play we have him traveling along the path. Let's highlight the first frame. We'll open up the spline block. We'll set the tension to 1 on all of these frames. Let's highlight the frames and spin tension up to 1. So now these frames are an ease in, ease out, like an inchworm would do. Just zips from the next frame to the next frame. Let's start working on the tail. We want to make the tail follow the head. We can't see the head's keyframes. Well, that's easy to fix. Just hold down the control key and multi-select the head. Now his keyframes show up in the DM. So our tail is selected. Let's zoom in. We'll tap the A key and we'll just keep a close eye on this. You can see that on frame 0 it's about 1 square's distance between the tip of the tail and the base of the head. We'll zoom forward to frame 10. We'll highlight one of the translates so we have our translate activated. Click on the M. Let's move up here and we'll move the tail up and make sure it's about 1 grid spacing apart. Let's move them forward to frame 20. So we'll shift this to frame 20. Rotate him so he aims at the head. We'll right click and move him along local axis so he's about 1 grid spacing apart. Go to frame 30. Let's move him again. Position him so he's 1 grid spacing apart. And last keyframe, last extreme, frame 40. Move him along frame 40. He's 1 grid spacing apart and keep him on the path right behind the head. Go through a second pass with the tail. Click on the first keyframe, tail's aiming right. Second keyframe, he's still aiming at the base of the head. Third keyframe, center him. Fourth keyframe, fifth. So it looks good. Now let's flatten off the keys on the tail now. Run the tension up to 1. Select the next keyframe, tension to 1. Next keyframe, tension to 1. 1, F1. So what we have is he's sitting on the proper spots, but he'll be moving over. We'll have to fix that with a few passing positions in a later lesson. For right now, we can unhide the inchworm mesh. It shows up here as a little hairy bugger. And you can see if we press play that he inchworms from one end to the other. He's doing it all at the same time, so we will add an offset. Since these are basically two separate objects here, we can play with them differently after we've laid in our main extremes. In this case, let's deselect both of them. We'll highlight just the tail, and we'll marquee select all of the tail's keyframes. We'll start at 1, and we'll advance them 1 frame forward, so it starts 1 frame after the first one. So you can see I'm stretching just slightly when we press play. Advance them 2 frames forward, the stretch becomes even more. 3 frames forward, 4, and so on. It depends on how much you want him to stretch. This is just altering the position of the extremes. You can go really insane and just keep moving him until he's really stretchy, but usually keep it about 1 or 2 frames distant and he looks like he's stretching and dragging along. Go to File. We're going to save this scene as Extremes4DV.fxs.